The royal city of Varen was unlike any other place in the galaxy. Its towers were built from shining crystal that caught the twin suns and made the entire skyline glow. In the heart of the city stood the Emperor's Grand Arena, a place where alien champions, human warriors, and strange beasts once competed to prove their strength. But lately, the arena had been silent. The reason for the silence was a single creature. The Emperor's dragon-like pet, Cowrix. Cowrix was no ordinary beast. His body was longer than 3 hovercrafts placed nose to tail. His scales shifted in color like molten metal, moving between deep gold and burning orange. His wings, when spread, could cast a shadow over an entire street. But the most striking thing about him was his eyes, the golden orbs that burned with anger and pain. Years ago, Cowrix had been the pride of the Emperor's court. He was brought from the distant world of Xander Prime, where the sky storms never ended and the air shimmered with lightning. There, his kind were seen as guardians of their tribes. Cowrix had once been noble, loyal, and fierce, but during the Great Border War, he had been captured by an enemy race and held in a deep cage for many cycles. When he was finally rescued, he was no longer the same. His trust was gone, his loyalty shattered. Now he lived in chains inside the arena, striking at anyone who came near him. The Emperor had tried to tame him again, but every tamer, alien or human, failed. Some were thrown against the walls. Others were knocked unconscious before they could even touch him. It became a legend across the city. No human could last 5 minutes with Cowrix. One morning, a messenger ran through the streets, spreading new orders from the Emperor himself. A fresh challenge was declared. The Emperor would reward anyone, man or woman, alien or human, who could tame Cowrix. Not defeat him in battle, but truly tame him. The reward was said to be enough to buy an entire starship and live in comfort for a lifetime. Still, the people whispered among themselves. Many had tried. None had survived more than minutes. Crowds gathered in the market to discuss the news. Traders leaned over their stalls, speaking in hushed tones. Young warriors argued about whether it was bravery or foolishness to even attempt it. And above them all, in the palace, the Emperor sat on his crystal throne, knowing the challenge was as much a test of courage as it was of skill. 2 days later, the announcement reached a quiet asteroid colony far from Varen. There, in a small metal home on the edge of a mining station, lived Daniel. He was a retired human soldier, once part of the Galactic Peace Guard. His life now was slow and simple. He spent mornings repairing small machines for the miners, afternoons walking along the station's glass corridors, watching the stars. When the message came, Daniel read it twice. He knew of Cowrix. Everyone did. He remembered seeing the dragon years ago, during the war, soaring over the battlefield alongside human and alien soldiers. Back then, Cowrix's roar had been a call to courage. But when the dragon disappeared, after a battle in the eastern sector, Daniel had feared the worst. It was only later that he heard Cowrix had been found alive but changed. Daniel poured himself a cup of hot brew and sat at his table. The logical choice was to ignore the challenge. He was no longer a soldier. He had not faced a beast in years, but something deep in him stirred. He thought of the way the war had broken not only machines and cities, but also the living beings that fought in it. Cowrix had been a comrade once, even if they had never spoken. Could that bond be repaired? The next morning, Daniel packed a small bag. He did not take weapons, only a heavy jacket, a water pack, and a thin roll of metal wire, something soldiers once used to fix broken gear in the field. He booked a transport ship to Varen, the ticket costing nearly all the credits he had saved. The journey took 3 days. Through the wide observation windows of the ship, Daniel watched the stars slide past in slow arcs. He thought about what he would face. The challenge was not about strength. If it were, the Emperor's guards could have overpowered the dragon long ago. It was about trust, and that was far harder to win. When the ship landed on Varen, the air was heavy with the heat of the twin suns. The city's streets were crowded with visitors from dozens of worlds. Traders shouted in alien tongues, food, Stalls hissed with the smell of frying spice meat. In the distance, the crystal towers gleamed. And above all, the great dome of the Emperor's arena rose like a mountain. Daniel made his way there, passing banners that showed Calrix's image. A massive beast with wings spread wide, flames curling from his jaws. The words beneath each banner read, "Last 5 minutes and win." Inside the arena's waiting hall, a clerk scanned Daniel's ID. "You're human," she said, surprised. "Most humans don't try." The last one lasted 1 minute 42 seconds. Daniel only nodded. "I'm not here to fight," he said. The clerk gave him a puzzled look but handed him a wristband. "When the gong sounds, the doors will open. You will have 5 minutes to prove yourself. The Emperor watches from above." That night, Daniel stayed in a small room inside the arena complex. Through the thin walls, he could hear the distant rumble of the dragon's roars. Each sound was deep and powerful, like a storm moving across the horizon. But there was something else in that sound too, something Daniel could not yet name. Morning came. The sun's first light spilled across the arena floor as the gates opened. The stands were filled with thousands of onlookers, citizens, traders, soldiers, and even alien nobles in silk robes. All eyes turned toward the iron doors on the far side. A deep horn sounded. The doors swung open with a metallic groan, and Calrix stepped into the light. The dragon was even larger than Daniel remembered. Scars marked his side, and one wing had a long tear near the edge. His golden eyes locked onto the human walking toward him. The crowd fell silent. 5 minutes, they thought. 5 minutes was all the human would last, but Daniel did not rush. He moved slowly, his boots crunching against the sand. His hands were empty. He met the dragon's gaze and stopped. A few steps away, breathing steadily, the gong sounded, and the challenge began. The sand beneath Daniel's boots crunched softly as he took another step forward. The arena air was hot, dry, and filled with the faint smell of scorched stone. Above, the crowd's whispers moved like wind, carrying a mix of excitement and doubt. Every eye was locked on the strange scene. A lone human standing calmly before the Emperor's feared dragon. Calrix lowered his head slightly, his golden eyes narrowing. A deep rumble escaped his throat, rolling across the arena like distant thunder. His claws dug into the sand, and the chains that bound him clinked and scraped. The morning light danced across his molten-colored scales, making him seem more like a living flame than a creature of flesh. Daniel's gaze did not waver. His heartbeat was steady, though every muscle in his body knew the danger that stood before him. The stories of tamers being thrown against the arena walls were not just tales. He had seen the aftermath years ago when soldiers tried to calm wild war beasts. But Daniel had not come here to fight. Fighting was the reason Calrix had become. Broken in the first place. From high above, in the Emperor's balcony, alien nobles leaned forward. Curious, the Emperor himself sat still, eyes locked on the human below. He had seen warriors come in shouting, charging, swinging weapons. All of them lasted less than 5 minutes. But this one came with no weapon, no shield, and no visible fear. Calrix gave a sharp snort, sending a hot breath of air across Daniel's face. It was not an attack yet, more of a warning. The crowd tensed, expecting the beast to lunge. Instead, Daniel took a slow breath and spoke. His voice was low but steady. "You were there," he said, his words carrying across the quiet arena. "The night the sky burned, the night the enemy swarmed our lines." Calrix's head tilted, just slightly. His eyes did not blink. Daniel took another small step forward, careful not to move too quickly. "I was there too. I saw you land beside the command tent. You were whole then, proud, strong. You looked at us, the humans, as if we were worth fighting for." The dragon's tail shifted, dragging across the sand with a hiss. His wings twitched once, as if remembering something. Daniel continued, his tone calm. "We fought side by side that night, you and the others like you. You roared, and the enemy broke. But then they caught you. They took you away. When I heard you had been found, I hoped you would be the same." A low growl rose from Calrix's chest. It was not the same growl of warning from before. It was heavier, more like a sound pulled from deep inside. The crowd watched, confused. This was not how humans usually lasted past the first minute. Normally there was shouting, dodging, running. This man was just standing there, talking. Daniel's eyes moved to the thick collar around Colrix's neck. The metal was blackened in one spot, as if burned. His gaze stayed there a moment. Then he met the dragon's eyes again. "I know what they did to you," he said. "I know the kind of marks they leave. You are not angry because you are wild. You are angry because you were hurt." The words hung in the hot air. Colrix's breathing slowed. His head came down a little lower. His golden eyes stayed locked on Daniel's face, searching for something. Perhaps it was honesty. Perhaps it was the faint memory of trust. Daniel knew this was a fragile moment. He could not push too quickly. He took one more step, until he stood close enough to see the faint scratches between the dragon's scales. They were not all from battle. Some were from the chains themselves, from the Emperor's balcony. A noble leaned toward him and whispered, "He is closer than any human before." The Emperor gave no reply, but his eyes narrowed with interest. The dragon gave another rumbling sound, this one deeper and longer. The chains clinked as he shifted his weight. Daniel stood still, his hands open at his sides, showing he carried nothing. "I am not here to control you," Daniel said softly. I am here to remember you, the one who once made even the enemy tremble." For a moment, nothing moved. The crowd held its breath. Even the banners hanging around the arena seemed to stop fluttering. Then, Colrix slowly blinked. It was such a small gesture that most of the crowd missed it, but Daniel saw it, and many creatures. A slow blink was not just a blink, it was a sign of caution softening, even if just a little. The gong sounded, marking the passing of the first 2 minutes. Gasps rose from the stands. No human had made it this far in months. Daniel allowed himself a slow breath, 2 minutes down. But he knew the real test would come when the Emperor ordered the chains removed. That was when Colrix would decide whether this was trust or another enemy to strike down. As if sensing his thought, Colrix shifted his weight again, the metal links rattling against the stone posts. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a puff of hot air escaped his nostrils. Daniel did not back away. He only adjusted his stance, so he stood balanced, ready to move if needed, but not ready to fight. "You were a guardian," Daniel said, "not a prisoner. You should not be kept like this, high above." The Emperor's voice suddenly broke the silence. "Remove the chains." The order sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. The guards hesitated. Removing the chains before the 5-minute mark was dangerous, but the Emperor's gaze was sharp, and they obeyed. 2 armored guards stepped forward, unlocking the heavy clamps. Each link of the chain was as thick as Daniel's wrist. One by one, they fell away, hitting the sand with dull thuds. When the last chain fell, Colrix did not move. His golden eyes stayed on Daniel, watching. The crowd grew louder with nervous murmurs. This was the moment when most challengers were struck down. Daniel stood still, his breathing steady, his gaze calm. "It's your choice," he said softly. His words meant for the dragon alone. "I will not run." For a long moment, neither moved. Then, Colrix took one step forward. The sand shifted under his massive claws. His head lowered until his golden eyes were level with Daniel's chest. Hot breath rolled over the human like a wave. Every muscle in Daniel's body stayed calm, though his mind was ready for anything. Another step. The dragon's shadow swallowed Daniel's own. The crowd was silent again. The gong sounded, marking for minutes. 1 minute left, and Colrix was still not attacking. The heat from Colrix's breath washed over Daniel, making the air feel heavier. The sound of the dragon's slow breathing was the only thing filling the arena now. Thousands of eyes were fixed on the 2 figures, one towering and covered in molten-colored scales, the other standing still. No armor, no weapons. Daniel did not move. His gaze stayed steady on Colrix's golden eyes. He knew the creature could sense fear. Many tamers before him had broken at this exact moment, their legs shaking, their bodies ready to run. And once they moved in panic, Colrix struck without hesitation. But Daniel had fought on battlefields where fear was constant. and he had learned how to keep it from ruling him. Cowrix tilted his head slightly, the long curve of his neck glinting in the sun. The motion was slow, almost curious. His nostrils flared again, drawing in the human's scent. His pupils narrowed, and his tail gave a short, sharp flick across the sand. The movement sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. The Emperor watched. From his crystal balcony, elbows resting on the armrests, fingers tapping slowly. His expression gave away nothing, but inside, he wondered. This was the longest a human had ever stood before the dragon without a weapon or shield. Daniel spoke, his tone calm and clear. I remember the sound of your wings in the war. You moved. Above us like a shadow of hope. The enemy ran from that sound. His voice was quiet, but steady enough that the words carried across the silent arena. You are not meant to be feared like this. You are meant to be respected. The dragon's ears, small and sharp along the side of his head, twitched slightly. He did not pull away, nor did he lunge forward. Instead, he lowered his head just a little more, enough that Daniel could see the fine cracks along some of his scales, old damage, never fully healed. Daniel slowly lifted his right hand, palm open, showing he held nothing. I will not hurt you, he said. If you wish me gone, you only need to turn away. The movement of his hand drew a low rumble from Cowrix's throat. His claws shifted in the sand. The sound was deep, but it was not the roar of attack. It was something else, something searching. Daniel recognized it from his old days with war animals. It was the sound they made when they were uncertain, when they were deciding if the figure before them was friend or foe. The gong above the arena struck again. The echo rolled through the stands. 5 minutes had passed. Gasps broke out in the crowd. People leaned forward, craning their necks. Some nobles whispered to one another. Others simply stared, unable to believe it. No human had ever lasted this long. Not one. Daniel did not react to the sound of the gong. He kept his hand steady, his voice soft. Do you remember the night over the Raxen fields, when the sky turned green from the plasma fire? I saw you land in the middle of the chaos, pulling a wounded soldier away from the flames. I never forgot that. Cowrix's eyes blinked slowly, once, then again. Daniel knew enough about animal signs to understand. Blinking was trust, even. If only for a moment, it was a message that said, I do not see you as a threat right now. Daniel took one small step closer. There was a shift in the air. The crowd tensed again. A few called out warnings, thinking the dragon would strike. But Cowrix stayed still, his head tilted to keep Daniel in view. The Emperor's voice rang out from above. Closer, he commanded. Daniel obeyed, moving forward one careful step at a time until the space between him and Cowrix was only a few feet. He could feel the heat from the dragon's body now, see the small rise and fall of his chest. The scent of scorched stone and warm metal hung in the air. You remember me, Daniel said quietly. You do not know my name, but you remember what I was. I was not your enemy. The dragon's tail swept once more through the sand. Slower this time. Daniel noticed the tremor in the movement, not anger, but the restless energy of a creature that had not been free in a long time. Daniel lowered his hand slightly, letting it rest at his side. You do not need to bow. You do not need to obey. I am not here to own you. I am here because I think you are worth saving. For a moment, the dragon's eyes seemed to soften. Then Cowrix leaned forward, his massive head lowering until his snout was inches from Daniel's chest. Daniel could feel the vibration of the dragon's breath against his jacket. The sound was deep and steady, not the sharp growl of a threat. The crowd could barely breathe now. Every person watching knew this was the closest any human had come to touching the beast without being thrown across the arena. Daniel held his ground. It is your choice, he repeated. Cowrix stayed there, unmoving, his golden eyes searching Daniel's face. Then, slowly, the dragon gave a single deep huff of air, as if releasing some weight inside him. It was not a roar. It was not anger. It was something closer to recognition. High above, the Emperor leaned back in his throne. His eyes were sharp with thought. The moment had shifted. The challenge was no longer about surviving 5 minutes. It was about what would happen next. Daniel lowered his gaze just slightly. a gesture of respect among many creatures. "You have nothing to prove," he said. The dragon stayed still for another long moment. Then, in one slow motion, he stepped back. His head remained low, but his claws moved in a smooth line through the sand, marking a half circle around Daniel, a sign of space, a signal that the human was not to be attacked. The crowd erupted into noise, voices shouting over one another. Some cheered, others called for the challenge to end. But Daniel kept his focus on the dragon. He knew this was only the beginning. The emperor stood, raising one hand for silence. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. "The human has passed the first test. The next begins tomorrow." Daniel did not speak. He gave the dragon one last steady look, then turned and walked toward the gate behind him. Orcs watched, his golden eyes following until Daniel disappeared from view. The first contact had been made. The hardest part still lay ahead. The morning light broke across Veruin's crystal towers, painting the city in shades of gold and fire. Inside the arena complex, Daniel sat on the edge of a narrow bed in his chamber. The floor beneath him hummed faintly from the great machines that kept the arena's climate stable. He had slept lightly, his mind replaying the moments from yesterday, the heat of Kalrix's breath, the slow blink of those golden eyes, the step back instead of an attack. No one had said it, but Daniel knew he had done something that had not been seen in years. Yet he also knew it was not enough. One meeting did not rebuild trust. Today would be harder. A knock came at the door. A young alien attendant stepped inside, carrying a small plate of bread and fruit. "The emperor has called for you," she said, her voice respectful but curious. "The second trial begins at midsun." Daniel nodded. He ate in silence, his thoughts already on what was coming. When the attendant left, he rose and pulled on his jacket. This time, he left even the small tools he had carried yesterday. If the emperor wanted to see trust, then Daniel would go with nothing but his voice and his patience. The walk to the arena floor was longer than he remembered. Guards in polished armor stood along the hallway, their spears crossed until the command came to let him pass. The last gate opened to reveal the wide circle of sand, already warming under the twin suns. The stands were full again. From the emperor's balcony, a voice rang out, "Today, no chains." A wave of murmurs swept the crowd. The gates on the far side opened, and Kalrix stepped into the light, free from the heavy links that had bound him for years. His movements were smoother, but there was still a stiffness in his left wing, the old injury visible in the torn membrane. Daniel felt every eye on him, but his gaze stayed on the dragon. Kalrix's head lifted high, his neck arching as he looked. Over the arena, his tail swayed slowly, the tip brushing the sand. The gong sounded, marking the start of the second trial. Daniel stepped forward. He did not hurry. Each footstep was deliberate, a steady rhythm against the silence. Kalrix's eyes locked onto him, the pupils narrowing in the bright sun. The dragon's claws flexed slightly, digging into the sand. "You remember me from yesterday," Daniel said calmly. "I did not harm you then. I will not harm you now." Kalrix tilted his head. His ears twitched at the sound of the voice. He did not step forward, but neither did he back away. Daniel stopped at the same distance as before. "I know you do not trust easily. That is not weakness, that is survival." The dragon's tail made a slow arc through the sand. Daniel could feel the tension in the air. Every sound, the faint hum of the arena's shields, the rustle of robes in the stands, seemed sharper now. Then Daniel took a chance. He lowered himself to one knee, making his body smaller. "In the war," he said softly, "you came to us when we were surrounded. You shielded us from the fire. I remember how your wings looked when the flames lit the night. I never saw anything more powerful or more alive." Something in Kalrix's gaze shifted. The golden eyes stayed on Daniel, but the tightness in his stance eased. His breathing slowed. "You were not born for this cage," Daniel continued. "You were born to guard, to fight for what you chose, not for what you were ordered." The crowd was silent now, caught between awe and disbelief. This was not a contest of strength. It was something older, deeper, a conversation without shared words. Calrix took one step forward. The sand crunched under his weight. Daniel stayed still, letting the dragon close the distance. Another step. The shadow of the massive body began to cover Daniel. "You are more than their prize," Daniel said. The dragon's head lowered again, close enough that Daniel could see the faint, jagged scar under the collar line. His hand twitched at the sight, but he did not reach out yet. Trust was not taken. It was given. Daniel kept speaking, his tone even. "I did not know all you suffered when they took you, but I know it left a mark you cannot erase. That mark is not weakness. It is proof you endured." A low, deep rumble came from Calrix's chest. It was not the sound of a beast about to strike. It was heavier, like the echo of something remembered. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his voice softer. "Do you remember the night we pushed them back? Do you remember the wounded we carried to safety?" For the first time, Calrix's gaze shifted not away, but inward, as if looking at something only he could see. His breathing deepened. The tip of his tail still. Daniel slowly raised his hand, not toward the head, but just enough to show his palm again. "You chose to protect once," he said. "You can choose again." The dragon's nostrils flared. He leaned in, his massive snout stopping just short of Daniel's hand. The heat was intense, but Daniel did not move. They stayed like that for several breaths. Then, with surprising slowness, Calrix brushed the tip of his snout against Daniel's palm. It was not a full touch, more a test, but it was the first contact. A wave of noise rose from the stands, half disbelief, half amazement. Daniel stayed still, letting the moment be what it was. "You have not forgotten," he murmured. The gong rang again, marking the end of the trial. The emperor rose from his throne. "Enough for today," he said, his voice carrying over the cheers and shouts. "The final test comes soon." Daniel lowered his hand. Calrix did not pull away sharply. Instead, he stepped back slowly, his golden eyes still on the human dot as Daniel walked toward the gate. He could feel the dragon's gaze follow him. Behind those eyes, something was changing. The past had not been erased, but a bridge had begun to form. And Daniel knew bridges, once built, could be crossed again. The sun was already high over Varen when the emperor's horn sounded across the city. Its deep, rolling note echoed through the streets, telling everyone that the final trial would begin soon. People left the markets and workshops to crowd toward the grand arena. Even the air seemed thicker with anticipation. This was not just another challenge. This was the last test for the strange human who had already lasted longer than anyone before him. In the waiting chamber beneath the arena, Daniel stood by the open archway, watching the sands outside through the heavy gate. He could hear the crowd's restless voices above, like the low roar of an ocean. The air smelled faintly of dust and heated stone. His jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, the fabric worn from years of use. A guard approached, his armor catching the light. "When the gong strikes," the guard said, "the gates will open. You will face the Emperor's beast with no chains, no guards, and no shield between you. If you survive and the Emperor believes the dragon accepts you, you will be declared the victor." Daniel nodded once. He did not ask questions. He knew what this meant. The dragon would be free to do whatever it wished if Calrix chose to attack. There would be no time to escape. The gong struck once, a deep metallic note that rolled through the walls. The gate began to rise, its chains rattling loudly. Bright sunlight spilled into the waiting chamber. Daniel stepped forward, the heat of the arena floor already reaching him across the sand. The far gate opened. Calrix emerged, his body moving with a slow, powerful grace. Without the chains, the torn wings still gave him an uneven silhouette, but it did not lessen the strength in his stride. His molten-colored scales caught the sunlight, making him look like a moving flame. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts. From his crystal throne above, the Emperor raised a single hand for silence. His voice carried across the arena. "Let this be the final test. The human has lasted the minutes. He has faced the beast unarmed. Now we see if he can win its loyalty." The gong struck again, and the trial began. Daniel walked toward the center of the arena, his steps slow and steady. Cowrick stopped halfway across the sand, lowering his head slightly as his eyes fixed on the human. His tail moved in slow arcs, brushing through the sand like a pendulum. "You know me now," Daniel said calmly. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the still air. "I came to speak, not to fight. That has not changed." Cowrick's pupils narrowed, his chest rising and falling in deep breaths. He took one step forward. The sound of his claws crunching into the sand echoed. Faintly, another step followed, each one careful but sure. The heat from his body reached Daniel before they even met. The crowd sat in silence. Even the banners hanging above seemed still. Daniel stopped when they were only a few steps apart. "You are free right now," he said. "You can leave this arena if you wish. You can end this trial any way you choose. But I hope you will hear me first." The dragon's ears twitched at the sound of the human's voice. His head tilted just enough to show one golden eye fully focused on Daniel. Daniel slowly raised his right hand, palm open, and waited. He did not move closer. He let Cowrick decide. The dragon's breath warmed the space between them. He leaned forward, his massive snout drawing near. Then, instead of striking, he stopped and simply stared at the human's hand. Daniel kept speaking, his tone steady. "When the war ended, we all had to choose how to live again. I left the battlefield. I thought you were gone forever. But now I see you survived, even when the world tried to break you. That is strength no one can take away from you." The dragon's head lowered further, until the tip of his snout touched Daniel's open palm. The crowd gasped. Some nobles leaned forward, eyes wide. The emperor's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. Daniel felt the rough texture of the dragon's scales under his hand. They were warm, alive, and solid. He did not press harder. He let the touch be light, a sign of respect. "I cannot undo what happened to you," he said, "but I can stand with you if you will have me." Cowrick gave a slow rumble, deep and low. His eyes did not leave Daniel's. Then, in a single motion, he stepped forward again, moving past the human's side. The great head turned, brushing Daniel's shoulder before facing outward toward the emperor's balcony. The crowd exploded into noise, cheers, shouts, the stamping of feet. But Daniel knew this was not about spectacle. This was about the dragon's choice. Cowrick lowered his head toward the emperor, the motion deliberate. It was not a bow of submission. It was acknowledgement. Then he stepped back to Daniel's side, his shadow falling across the human. The emperor rose to his feet. His voice rang clear. "The beast has chosen. The human has passed." The gong struck once more, sealing the trial's end. Daniel exhaled slowly. He lowered his hand from the dragon's side, but Cowrick did not move away. The dragon's golden eyes stayed on him as they walked together toward the gate. The heat from the creature's body was intense, but Daniel welcomed it. It was the warmth of trust. Hard-earned. As they passed through the gate, the noise of the crowd faded behind them. Inside the shaded corridor, Cowrick stopped, turning his head to meet Daniel's eyes again. The human placed one hand lightly against the side of the dragon's face. "We're not done," he said quietly. "We've only just begun." The dragon gave another low rumble, and this time, it sounded almost like agreement. The arena gates had closed behind them, leaving the roar of the crowd and the heat of the sun behind. Inside the wide corridor, the air was cooler, shaded, and still. Daniel walked beside Cowrick, whose massive body moved with a careful grace. The dragon's scales reflected faint light from the walls, shimmering like molten gold even in shadow. The creature's wings were folded, the torn left wing still noticeable. But he moved without hesitation, matching Daniel's pace. Daniel studied Cowrick as they walked. For years, he had seen animals in war, creatures trained for battle, creatures that had been broken, creatures that had lost faith in humans. And he had known that trust, once lost, could take time to regain. But there was something different about Cowrick. He was not angry anymore. Not entirely. There was curiosity now, and something that reminded Daniel of the dragon he had once seen fighting at his side on the battlefield. They reached a wide chamber where the emperor and his council waited. The room was filled with the smell of polished stone and incense. Nobles and guards leaned forward, their eyes wide. Watching the unusual pair approach, Cowrix's shadow fell across the floor. Stretching longer than Daniel's own, the Emperor rose from his throne. "You have passed the trials," he said, his voice steady, but curiosity flickered in his golden eyes. "No human has ever done this. No one has lasted, and none have earned the dragon's trust." Daniel stepped forward respectfully. "The dragon chose," he said simply. "He can leave if he wishes. He does not need to stay because of me." The Emperor raised a hand to stop the murmurs of the council, and yet he does not leave. "He follows you." Cowrix lowered his head slightly, brushing the tip of his snout along Daniel's shoulder. It was not obedience. It was acknowledgement, a recognition that trust could be given, even between different species. Daniel nodded once. "He is not a prize. He is a partner," the council whispered among themselves, astonished. Some had never seen a human behave this way. Many had never seen a dragon act like this. The room was alive with tension, but also admiration. The Emperor spoke again. "If you wish, the dragon may remain free. You may leave the arena together. But I must know, why him? Why this human?" Daniel looked at Cowrix. The dragon's golden eyes followed him steadily, unblinking. "I did not force him," Daniel said. "I only remind him that he can choose. He remembers who he once was, and he knows that I respect him. That is enough for now." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then one of the counselors stepped forward. "You risked your life," the alien said. "You did not fight, yet the dragon obeyed you. What makes humans capable of such things?" Daniel smiled faintly. We remember those who helped us, and we remember what it feels like to be broken. And sometimes we choose patience over power." The Emperor studied him closely, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I thought." Cowrix moved closer to Daniel, leaning his massive head against the human's side. The contact was gentle but firm, a sign of comfort and acceptance. Daniel reached up and ran his hand along the dragon's scales, feeling the warmth and the strength beneath. "It will take time," he said quietly, "but we will get there." The Emperor's guards were cautious at first, keeping their distance. They had faced dragons in war and had seen warriors thrown aside with ease. But Cowrix did not strike. He only stood beside Daniel, patient and alert. As the crowd in the arena began to disperse, Daniel and Cowrix moved toward the outer gates. The streets of Varen were busy with traders, travelers, and citizens going about their morning business. People stopped and stared at the unusual sight, a human walking calmly beside a massive, golden-scaled dragon. Some whispered in awe, while others simply stepped aside. Daniel glanced down at Cowrix. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked softly. "They will all talk about this for cycles. But it does not matter. What matters is that you are free to choose every day, and that I will respect it." Cowrix gave a low rumble in response. It was the closest he came to speaking without words. His eyes flicked over the streets, over the people, over the city itself. Then he looked back at Daniel. His head was still high, but the tension in his shoulders had eased. They reached the edge of the city, where the crystal towers gave way to open plains. The wind blew over the fields, lifting sand and dust in faint swirls. Cowrix stretched his wings slightly, testing the air. Daniel stayed close, letting the dragon adjust to the freedom he had been given. "You can fly any time," Daniel said. "But stay if you want. There's no chain here. Only trust." For a long moment, the dragon did not move. Then he lowered his massive body to the ground, kneeling beside Daniel. It was a gesture of patience and caution, but also of acceptance. Daniel touched the dragon's scales again, feeling the vibration of his breathing, the warmth of life. The Emperor's voice came to him then, carried on the wind from the distant palace. "Human," he called, "you have done what none could. I expected the dragon to strike, but you have proven something. Perhaps it is the strength of patience. Perhaps it is the strength of humanity itself." Daniel nodded. "It is neither strength nor weakness," he said softly. "It is respect. That is all any creature deserves." Cowrix leaned closer, resting his massive head near Daniel's shoulder. The crowd in the distance had begun to disperse, but a few travelers paused to stare at the pair. Stories would spread across the stars of the human who tamed a broken dragon, not with force, but with patience and understanding. Daniel looked out toward the horizon. Beyond the plains, there were forests, mountains, and open skies. He knew that this was only the beginning. Cowrix had been freed from the chains, but the scars ran deep. Healing would take time. Trust would need to grow. And yet, for the first time in years, the dragon was willing to try. "You survived yesterday," Daniel said quietly, speaking to both the dragon and himself. "And you have chosen to trust again. That is enough for now." Cowrix gave another low rumble, soft and steady. It was not a roar of aggression, nor a roar of challenge. It was a sound of acknowledgement, a sound of partnership forming. Daniel reached up and placed his hand on the side of the dragon's massive head. The scales were warm, strong, alive. They stood together in silence for several moments, listening to the wind, feeling the sun, and letting the first real bond between human and dragon settle. The journey ahead would not be easy. The dragons' trust could be fragile, and the world would doubt their partnership. But Daniel knew one thing. Cowrix had chosen him, and in return, Daniel would honor that choice. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel led Cowrix back toward the city's gates. The dragon's massive form moved with controlled grace, and Daniel matched his pace. Citizens stared in awe as they passed, and Daniel knew the story would be told for cycles to come. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the bond forming. Here, in the quiet moments, away from the crowds and the glory, Cowrix had been broken. Daniel had been retired, and yet, together, they were beginning something new. A partnership not built on power or fear, but on trust, respect, and understanding. And that was stronger than any chain, stronger than any weapon, and stronger than any legend in the galaxy. The sky above Varen was streaked with gold and crimson as the twin suns began to descend. The city was quieter than usual. Most citizens had returned to their homes. Yet a crowd lingered near the grand arena. Word had spread across the city. The human who had survived the dragon trials and earned its trust would face the final challenge today. Daniel stood at the entrance of the arena, his eyes calm and steady. Beside him, Cowrix shifted slightly, the great dragon's scales glinting in the late sun. His wings stretched just enough to catch the light, showing both their power and the scarred left wing. Despite the old injury, there was confidence in every movement. Inside the arena, the emperor waited, his crystal throne glimmering in the sunlight. Nobles and guards lined the walls, their eyes focused on the unusual pair. Some whispered among themselves. Few had expected the human and the dragon to reach this far. Most assumed the trials would end in failure before this moment. The emperor's voice rang out, commanding and steady. "This is the final test, beyond survival and trust. I want to see partnership. Human, dragon, show me that your bond is true. Prove that you are united in thought and action. Fail, and the trials end." Daniel nodded once. "We will not fail," he said quietly, but Cowrix's ears twitched at the tone of his voice. The dragon's golden eyes met his, and a subtle rumble echoed from deep in his chest. It was not a sound of warning, but a signal, affirmation, readiness. The gong sounded, echoing across the arena. Immediately, the outer gates opened from the shadows. Mechanical constructs, enemies built for combat, fast and unpredictable, emerged. They had been programmed to test the bond between Daniel and Cowrix, to see if trust alone could overcome danger. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped forward, Cowrix close by. The constructs advanced in synchronized patterns, their movements precise. Daniel raised a hand slightly, guiding the dragon's attention. "We face them together," he said. Cowrix's wings unfurled, stretching wide. The sound of their movement was like rolling thunder. Then, in a sudden burst, the dragon leaped into the air, landing with a shockwave that rattled the sand. The first construct lunged, and Cowrix's tail swept in a wide arc, knocking it aside without harming it lethally. The crowd gasped at the controlled power, at the precision of the strike. Daniel moved as well, his experience in battle guiding his steps. He dodged and rolled, directing Colors with subtle gestures, his voice calm and firm. Now, left flank, he said, and the dragon adjusted, moving in unison. Every attack from the constructs was met not with fear, but with coordination. Colrix's massive claws and wings combined with Daniel's quick thinking created a rhythm that was almost seamless. The dragon's trust in the human allowed them to anticipate each other's movements, their actions flowing like water round obstacles. The Emperor leaned forward, eyes narrowed. He had expected chaos. Instead, he saw strategy, unity, and mutual understanding. Remarkable, he whispered, almost to himself. Minutes passed, each more intense than the last. The constructs became faster, more unpredictable, yet Daniel and Colrix adapted without hesitation. Daniel's voice remained calm, instructive, guiding the dragon through each maneuver. Colrix responded, not out of fear or obedience, but out of choice, out of recognition of a shared goal. Then, one construct broke formation and charged directly at Daniel. Without thinking, Colrix leaped forward, placing his body between the human and danger. Daniel reached out, his hand resting lightly on the dragon's shoulder. "I am here," he said. The dragon's rumble matched his voice. Together, they moved as one, sidestepping the attack and using the construct's momentum to neutralize it safely. The crowd's whispers turned into cheers. Nobles gasped. Guards lowered their spears in astonishment. Even the Emperor's face shifted from skepticism to admiration. This was more than a trial of survival. This was a display of partnership, intelligence, and understanding that transcended species. As the last construct fell, disabled but intact, Colrix lowered himself to the ground. Chest heaving slightly, Daniel stepped beside him, placing his hand on the dragon's massive head. "Well done," he said, voice calm but filled with pride. The Emperor rose slowly. "I see it now," he said, his tone echoing through the arena. "Trust, respect, partnership. You have not only survived, but you have proven that a bond between human and dragon is not just possible. It is strong. Stronger than fear, stronger than chains, stronger than legend itself." Colrix gave a low, steady rumble, as if acknowledging the Emperor's words without needing to act. The dragon's golden eyes met Daniel's, and in that look was a silent agreement. They had faced the trials together, survived, and emerged as equals. Daniel bowed slightly, showing respect to the Emperor. "Thank you," he said simply. "But this is not about glory. This is about trust. About proving that even the broken can choose to stand again, and that those who have been retired, overlooked, or underestimated still have worth." The Emperor's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps humanity is more than I realized," he said. "Perhaps there is a lesson here not just for dragons, but for all who judge by strength alone." Colrix stepped closer to Daniel, resting his head against the human's shoulder once more. The contact was not a sign of submission, but of mutual respect and partnership. Daniel reached up, feeling the warmth and the living strength beneath the scales. The crowd erupted into cheers, not just for survival, but for what they had witnessed. A human and a dragon moving as one, proving that patience, respect, and understanding could triumph over power alone. As the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across the arena, Daniel and Colrix walked side by side toward the gates. Citizens lined the streets, whispering tales that would spread across planets and generations. Stories of a retired human who had tamed a broken dragon, not with weapons or force, but with patience, trust, and understanding. Outside the arena, the wind swept across the plains. Colrix tested his wings, stretching them wide. Daniel stood close, watching. "You're free to fly," he said softly, "but stay if you wish. The choice is yours." The dragon gave a low, steady rumble. Then, with a graceful motion, he leaped into the air. Daniel followed, running across the sand, feeling the dragon's shadow pass over him. Colrix landed a few feet away, looking back at Daniel, and that look was a silent promise. A partnership that would endure, a trust that could never be broken. The Emperor watched from his balcony, silent for a moment. Then he nodded. Perhaps humans are capable of more than we ever imagined, he said. Perhaps it is not just strength that rules the galaxy, but understanding, patience, and courage of heart. Daniel looked up at the dragon, feeling the bond they had forged. The trials were over, but their journey had only begun. Together, they would explore worlds, face challenges, and prove that even the underestimated, the retired, and the broken could rise to greatness. Orcs gave a deep rumble, stretching his wings into the wind. Daniel reached up, resting a hand against the dragon's massive side. The partnership was no longer a test or a trial. It was real, it was alive, and it would endure beyond legends, beyond stories, beyond time. The suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that matched Orcs' molten scales. Daniel smiled, feeling hope, strength, and pride. The human and the dragon had proven themselves not through fear or force, but through trust, respect, and unity. The galaxy would remember this day, and the legend of the retired human and the broken dragon would inspire countless generations to come.